Prior to his death, Ed Sullivan listed 6 singers he detested most. Just as the curtain went down on his phenomenal career and life, America's most influential television host made a bombshell confession. The guy who could make stars overnight, the kingmaker whose stone-faced approval or stiff wave of the hand could make careers take off or end them, finally confessed something he had withheld for decades. The names of the singers whom he really couldn't stand. For 2 decades, Ed Sullivan's Sunday night variety show was the country's cultural doorstep, a stage upon which individuals like Elvis Presley, the Beatles, the Supremes, and thousands more came in as performers and left as legends. Yet behind the iconic wooden personality that millions of families invited into their homes each week, there existed grudges, smoldering resentments, and a blacklist of performers that Sullivan bore quietly to his grave. His audience perceived him as the neutral master of ceremonies, a friendly ringmaster who set up acts with his rigid stance and staccato speech. But behind the camera, he might be hot-tempered, vengeful, and profoundly disturbed by artists who refused to conform to his Weltanschauung. When Sullivan eventually shared his secret list, it shocked not only because of the names on it, but because of what it indicated about the wars seething off the screen of television's golden age. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. Take Elvis Presley. On the air, Sullivan had once introduced him as a real decent fine boy, but in private he thought Presley was vulgar, unsafe, even a scandal to American entertainment. In the middle 1950s, when rock and roll erupted out of Memphis, Sullivan proclaimed that Elvis would never, absolutely never, be on a show. He wasn't only doubtful, he was appalled. Observing Elvis writhe through Hound Dog on Milton Berle's show convinced Sullivan that no decent family show could ever have such lewdness. Papers reported his outrage, labeling Presley as a foe of good taste. But America wasn't heeding Sullivan's advice. Teenagers were already going head over heels for Elvis. When Steve Allen booked him and gained ratings that flattened Sullivan's, the high ground suddenly became awfully costly. Grudgingly, Sullivan changed direction, making Elvis a record $50,000 for 3 shows. Even then, he attempted to exercise control by instructing cameramen to film Presley from the waist up only. Nevertheless, when Elvis made his debut on September 9, 1956, more than 60 million watched, an incredible 82% of TV viewers. For Sullivan, this was victory camouflaged as embarrassment. His ratings zoomed, yet he had been compelled to feature an artist he detested. Though he assured America Elvis was a fine boy, in private, he never forgave the artist for having shown him the bounds of his authority. If Sullivan's grudging admission of mass popularity was Elvis, Buddy Holly was his outright challenge. The bespectacled Texan and his group, the Crickets, were leading the rock charge with Peggy Sue, and that'll be the day by January 1958. Their invitation to the Sullivan Show should have been the height of honor. Instead, it ended as a standoff. During rehearsals, Sullivan insisted they remove their intended performance of Oh Boy due to lyrics he considered too racy. All of my love, all of my kissing, you don't know what you've been missing. Holly politely refused. We told your people what songs we were going to do. We're doing Oh Boy. That passive resistance infuriated Sullivan. He mispronounced Holly's name on purpose, introduced the band with barely a flicker of enthusiasm, and allegedly sabotaged the microphone levels. Yet Holly delivered anyway, grinning through technical obstacles and winning over the audience. Afterward, Sullivan's handshake was limp, his dismissal brisk, and there was no invitation to return. In 1958, challenging Ed Sullivan could ruin a career. But Holly's stance represented the impending change. Young musicians who preferred authenticity to pleasing gatekeepers. Sadly, Holly's life was taken from him when he died in a plane crash in 1959, but his short revolt foreshadowed the struggles that would characterize music and culture for years to come. Few battles made Sullivan's limitations more apparent than his battle with Bob Dylan. In May 1963, Dylan was an emerging folk poet whose songs bore barbed political and social satire. He intended to sing Talkin' John Birch Paranoid Blues, a satirical ridiculing of Cold War hysteria. Sullivan observed the rehearsal, laughed at the humor, and okayed it. But hours before airtime, CBS lawyers freaked out. Afraid of being sued for defamation by the ultra-right John Birch Society, they asked Dylan to modify the lyrics or use another tune. Dylan said no. For him, the message of the song was everything. Compromise would drain it of its authority. With unflappable conviction, he left the largest television audience in America vacant. Sullivan was humiliated. CBS attempted to spin the fiasco as a misunderstanding, but Dylan's move only served to reinforce his image. He was the artist who would not compromise the conscience of a generation willing to challenge the powers that be. Sullivan, in private conscience-stricken, never received another opportunity. Dylan never returned to his program again. The walkout became the stuff of legend, highlighting that television's cultural gatekeeper was losing control of the artists who were defining the new generation. There was also James Brown, the godfather of soul, whose dynamic stage presence caused Sullivan to fidget. Sullivan had long featured black performers on his program, but he liked the ones who exuded polish and restraint. Nat King Cole, Lena Horne, the Supremes. Brown was the opposite. Sweaty, crashing to his knees, screaming with gospel-infused energy, his performances teetered on the edge of the ecstatic. For Sullivan, who enjoyed control and predictability, Brown's uncontainable force was both exhilarating and horrifying. Producers attempted to rein him in, no splits, tone it down, make it family-friendly. But even curbed, James Brown emanated power that television barely could contain. His performances introduced soul, music into the living rooms of mainstream white America, discomfiting Sullivan's sense of propriety. He acknowledged Brown's box office power but curtailed his exposure, not wanting to give the hardest working man in show business his full fury on national television. Brown also pointed out the double standard. White rock musicians were allowed to be wild, but black artists had to sound without the feeling. Sullivan's discomfort with Brown demonstrated not only private discomfort, but the racial and cultural fault lines dividing America. No performance epitomized Sullivan's contradictions more than the Beatles. On February 9, 1964, when Sullivan welcomed them on to his show with the words, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles," 73 million Americans watched. The mop-haired British invaders were a hit, and Sullivan luxuriated in the ratings boom. But behind the stiff grin, he was uncomfortable. They seemed to him absurdly cut, cheeky in their humor, their yelling fans disquieting echoes of the Elvis mania. But the Beatles were ratings, and Sullivan was realistic. But as the band matured, taking on psychedelia, social commentary, and counterculture, Sullivan was alarmed. John Lennon's "more popular than Jesus" comment outraged him. Their studio explorations and avant-garde videos bored him. By 1968, when the band played Revolution and Hey Jude through pre-recorded tapes, Sullivan growled, "They're not the nice boys they used to be. This isn't what our audience wants." The Beatles never came back. For Sullivan, it was betrayal. He had brought them to America, and now they advocated values he abhorred. For the Beatles, Sullivan was a stepping stone they had long since left behind. If the Beatles floated away, the Doors exploded a confrontation. Set to play Light My Fire on the 17th of September 1967, they were instructed to modify The Lying Girl. "We couldn't get much higher," to better. Everybody understood higher suggested drugs. The band concurred on the surface, but when the red light came on, Jim Morrison stared into the camera and sang the line exactly as written. It wasn't a slip, it was defiance. The performance ended, and Sullivan refused his customary handshake. Backstage, a furious producer told the band, "You'll never do this show again." Morrison smirked. "We just did the Ed Sullivan Show." The Doors were blacklisted forever. For Morrison, it was a victory of defiance. For Sullivan, it was embarrassment. The erstwhile unassailable gatekeeper had been ridiculed on his own turf. Collectively, these 6 confrontations, Elvis Presley, Buddy Holly, Bob Dylan, James Brown, the Beatles, and the Doors, were more than rival personalities. They were totems of a war over culture. Sullivan, who was born in 1901, represented pre-war mores: restraint, propriety, authority. His variety show, which began in 1948, was founded on vaudeville routines, Broadway songs, clean humor, novelty acts. America was evolving, though. The baby boom birthed a youth culture that insisted on something brasher, louder, more open. Rock and roll, soul, protest folk,